Hi, today we'll be going through a 2022 movie titled Gold. The movie is about two men who found a pile of gold in a desert. So let's watch out and see if either of them successfully took the gold. Stay tuned to the betrayal that would arise. The movie begins with a man looking distressed as he munches on his little food on a moving train. His name is Virgil. Getting down from the train, he limped slightly and went to a shop, and he told them that he wants to make use of the toilet. Seeing the sight of the toilet, he sighed deeply but made use of it as flies buzzed around. He was then driven by a man named Keith to his destination, which is the compound. Along the way, Keith informed him about the expenses, but Virgil complained, stating that he wasn't told that amount. Keith then said that it wasn't late to turn back, and Virgil replied that it was fine. He would pay the money, thereby sighing deeply. At sunset, they decided to rest at a place before continuing their journey the next morning. So they made a fire to keep themselves warm and scare the wild dogs in the desert. Some while later, they began chatting, and Keith asked him why he was going to the compound, and Virgil replied that he wants to go get a lifetime opportunity. He then showed Keith the pamphlet that he had seen, but Keith laughed and said they were trying to fool them, and even if it was real, he won't be able to take it due to his cool nature. But Virgil remained adamant, and the next morning they drove off to their destination. On their way, the car broke down due to overheating, and Virgil stepped down from the car and went to ease himself at a spot. After doing this, he sighted a substance from afar and went closer. He cleared the dust and saw that it shined like gold. For a while, he hesitated in calling Keith over, but later did, and they checked the substance. Keith used the lighter to check if it was real gold and told him that if it turns black, then it isn't gold. And they watched anxiously, but after burning it for a while, the gold then turned black, and this made the two men step back, amazed at their luck. They had found a huge pile of gold embedded in the ground. They dug the side of the gold, uncovering the huge jackpot, but were unsuccessful in pulling out the gold. They made use of the car, tying a rope to it to pull the pile of gold, but still, their effort proved futile. Then Virgil drank and poured water on his head, feeling exhausted. When the sun began setting, they gathered sticks to make fire. Virgil and Keith then hurriedly looked for a shovel and tried digging out the gold. They pulled the gold, which was like a pile of rock embedded in the ground, but to no avail. In which they tried, they weren't able to pull it out. They made use of their car in pulling it out by tying some ropes to it and moving the car, but still, it was still stuck in the ground. Having tried their best, they decided to call it a day and take the rest of the gold site for the night. They gathered some sticks and made a fire that would sustain them for the night. It would prevent them from the wild dogs in the desert that could feed on human flesh. At night, Keith began jumping happily, shouting into the air that they would soon be very rich, and Virgil joined him. The both of them danced to their success. They then discussed a plan to remove the gold, and Keith suggested that he would stay behind and look after the gold, while Virgil would go to the city and rent an excavator from his friend. But Virgil refused. He said that Keith should go since he was the one that knew his friend while he stays with the gold, and they both agreed. The next morning, Keith gave him some water with him and a telephone that he could use to reach him, and then he departed, leaving Virgil alone in the silent and windy desert. Keith became lonely, and he set a small spot for himself to lay his head by attaching a big cloth to a tree. In the evening, he gathered sticks for the night, and after setting the fire, he fed on just a small portion of the food that could keep him alive. But he got scared when he heard the howling sound of the wild dogs late at night. When he woke up the next morning, he saw that he had slept off on the ground and wanted to use a little water to wash off the dirt in his hands, but stopped because he didn't want to use up the resources he had on him. And he ran limping to the small spot he made for himself as he heard the phone ringing, but when he got there, the battery was out, and this made him so sad as he sighed deeply. He gathered more sticks for the night, and while he checked around the desert, he saw a wrecked plane and removed some of its parts before sleeping for a while in the plane, feeling exhausted. In the evening, he had successfully finished building his little hut, and he was able to cut a chunk of the gold before Keith's call came in. He told Keith about the piece he had cut off, but Keith told him that he shouldn't dare move away from the gold, that it would take him longer, but he would soon be back and they would dig out all of the gold for themselves. At night, the dogs came closer, and he was very scared because they got bolder and tried attacking him, but he chased them away with a stick of fire. Luckily, he was able to scale through the night, and the next day, as he wanted to drink water, he made sure that not a single drop fell, sighing deeply as he stopped drinking. A few days later, a lady approached the desert, and Virgil ran to hide inside the wrecked airplane. The lady came over to the plane and she noticed someone was inside, so she checked in to speak to him. She kept questioning him as to what he was doing alone in the desert and that there was a safer place for him to live in, but he didn't answer her. Then she made her way to the little tent that he had built while he steamed at her that she should stop. At one point, he became angry at her and yelled at her that he had offered her shelter, so she should take it and leave him alone. Seeing that she isn't relenting and had caught on the idea that he was hiding something and wanted to send her away, he then struck her heavily on the face, making her fall to the floor while catching up on her last breath. She gave up the ghost and Virgil was scared, but he quickly digged a spot and buried her. A few hours later, the wild dogs came again, dug out the dead body and fed on her. He chased the dogs away, he kept coming closer, and in the night, he burnt up her body, using her as a source of fire for the night with tears in his eye. The next day, Keith called once again and said the excavator was weighing the car down, so he wouldn't make it in time, but he would try to come as fast as he can. And Virgil began crying and told him to be quick. Then a truck passed by the desert. He ran to hide away from the sight of the truck and cried, feeling sad for what he had done to the young lady. In the evening, a strong wind blew, sweeping up the sands and scattering every piece of metal and stick he had used to make his tent. He tried running away, but the wind swept him away as well. And the next morning, when he woke up, he removed himself from the sand covering his body and saw a big stick stuck to his stomach, and then he cried out in pain. He started standing up and limped his way to the gold. Later in the evening, he removed his stick stuck in his stomach, groaning in pain, and blood gushed out. He then burned some sticks and used a metal object to burn his wounded flesh. He groaned in pain and cried bitterly as he placed the object. The next morning, he fainted on the floor, and the lady gave him water to drink. He began hallucinating, seeing visions of the girl that he had burnt, and the phone began ringing. Keith told him to chase away any lady that is there and to stay safe, that he would soon be around. Then the lady gave him water, came to meet him. She asked after her sister and offered to take him to the waterhole, which is safer, but he shouted at her that she should go, and she looked at him suspiciously but left him alone. Later, he saw a lot of sticks around him burning, and when the fire was going out, the dogs approached closer, barking at him. Then Keith told him on the call that he was close by, making Virgil glint hope that he was going to be saved soon. He told him to hurry up, but Keith stopped responding to his call as he watched the struggling Virgil from a distance. He had lied to him all along. Virgil struggled hard against the dog, but they pounced at him all at once, biting each part of his body. When Keith noticed that he was dead, he went with the excavator to the site and saw Virgil's dead body with some part of his body being eaten already by the dog and didn't feel a bit of pity for the man. He went to his car and brought out gloves, but suddenly a flying arrow struck him in the heart and he died. Neither of them was able to retrieve the gold. The end. If you enjoyed the recap of this movie, then kindly stay tuned to more interesting movies.